to our this edition of From the Shelf with Curator Arnold Kling. Arnold recently reviewed a book called The Social Instinct for us at EconLib, and I'm very delighted to have several friends in attendance to talk with us about that book today. I told these gentlemen before we started that this is a program that brings the most disparate elements of my life together that I can possibly imagine, and so I'm super excited for this conversation. My name's Amy. I work for Liberty Fund. I'm the director of online programs in the EconLib websites. I'm just going to do some quick introductions and then hand it over to four of the smartest guys I know to talk about this book. First, I want to introduce my friend Jack Hope, who teaches philosophy at Butler University here in Indianapolis. Next on my screen, at least, is Dr. Chris Martin, who's the director of research at the Indianapolis Zoo. Next, we have Bart Wilson, who's a professor of economics at Chapman University. And of course, Arnold Kling, who needs no introduction, and I will allow him to introduce himself. As usual, we'll spend 30 to 40 minutes with our panelists talking about Nichola Raihani's book, and then we'll open it up to questions from you. So you can use the chat feature, the raise hand function. It's your show. We will also collect any links or citations that come up over the course of the conversation, and we'll drop those into the chat and send those to you later. So without further ado, I'm super excited to hear what you guys have to say about this. So Arnold, I will turn things over to you.
Great, thanks, Amy. Well, I think I'll just get right into this since I'm a little intimidated being here with genuine primatologists and a genuine experimental economist. That's Bart Wilson, who's, as I understand, has actually used chimpanzees in experiments. So this is, I imagine I will learn a lot and be corrected a lot if I try to say too much. So the book, for those of you in the audience who are not familiar with it, emphasizes the unique nature of human cooperation. She says that insects cooperate kind of as one organism. You can think of uh, a hive of bees as if it were just one organism. It's not like the individuals are negotiating and communicating and making decisions about how to cooperate or when not to cooperate. Whereas with humans, that we are making decisions where we're engaged in game theory. So I guess the first question I want to ask, and let me just start with Chris, and then I'll go to Bart and Jack, is does her basic story resonate with you, that what is unique about humans and compared to even our closest relatives is this ability to cooperate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Arnold, and thanks everyone for having me here. I'm honored to be here. It certainly did resonate with me. I think that she did a really great job of just kind of giving a really nice review of kind of a lot of disparate pieces of research spread around lots of different disciplines and kind of crafting a really kind of cohesive story out of it. And I think cooperation is a good starting point because it is something that is, at least in a cognitive sense, very unique to humans. I think she did a nice job of talking about cooperation as a phenomenon that applies to multiple species in different ways, at least the mechanisms through which it's achieved. So when humans, we kind of do it more from like a cerebral way of doing it. We think about hypotheticals and the best way to function. Whereas in a lot of species, like the ants and then some of the, the fish and the birds, they're cooperating, but they're not doing it in a conscious, reflective way we are. But it's kind of the outcome is the same, kind of in a pragmatic sense. So I thought that she kind of told that story so well, and it did resonate with me, especially some of the things she said about other primates besides ourselves and how they don't have the same kind of toolkit that we do, and so they're not able to achieve the same level of cooperation. But then at the same time, that they kind of have these a lot of different rudimentary forms of social interactions that kind of set the foundation for what has kind of become human social interaction. So yes, I was a big fan. I thought it was great, and I thought she did a great job just kind of summarizing a lot of different types of literature.
Bart, so you do economic experiments with chimpanzees. Um, does she capture an important difference in how a chimp economy would work with relative to a human economy?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yes. The idea that that they will do a job of matching. And so I've done tasks where they can match with another partner to get a better payoff. And so they can think through that process and remember what all the possible outcomes and combinations are, and then focus in on one of them. So they can really kind of do that cooperation in that kind of sense.
Can
But
you spell that out a little bit? Like give an example of an experiment in your
sure.
exercise?
So they can choose between a red token or a blue token. And if they both choose the red token, they're both going to get 4 units of the reward. But if either one of them just chooses the blue token, they just get 1 reward as for the blue token. But if you chose the red one and they chose the blue one, you get nothing. And so you got to be assured that the other one's going to choose the red one to both do that. And so the chimpanzees can find them that Nash equilibrium and zero in on it. They don't do it as the same way the humans do, though. Humans do it by just talking to each other and coordinating in that way. And so the humans will find it, lock onto it by saying, "Well, I'll do it, you do it," then they both do it. And so the idea is that chimpanzees can get there and do it kind of regularly. They just do it via a different mechanism. They don't immediately resort to language in order to solve it.
What's your speculation as to how they do arrive at it?
Well, so they can remember all the possibilities. In fact, what they're really good at, and what humans aren't good at, is remembering how all of those combinations are what they result in. And they know that the red one gives them something bigger, and the other one knows the red one is something bigger, and so they can both coordinate on that. Whereas, and so they try all those possibilities out. What's Humans, however, go in the same situation. They'll just kind of try a few out, and then they might not go and try the entire action space, in which case some of them can get locked into an inefficient outcome. In a way that a non-human primate, generally, they always explore the entire space. Everything possibly happens. It's a question of whether or not they can coordinate and remember those special outcomes.
Okay. So, Jack, what was your reaction to the book?
Yeah, so a couple of several. I thought that for lack of a better terms, the idea of this super organism was just a really cool concept, sort of all of these different parts of this community working together cohesively was interesting. And then I think generally speaking,
That's her picture of an ant colony, right?
Yeah.
Saying that humans are not like that.
Yeah, right. That the way that we cooperate is in maybe a much more selfish way or something like that. But I think what I was impressed with in this book was sort of the holistic approach, right? All the different ways that we talked about cooperation. So sort of separating cooperation from higher levels of cognition was extremely intriguing to me. To think about how cooperation happens when it's not intentional, and what that sort of means about how we came to be the creatures that we are, or something like that. And then I think in general, so one of the things I try to talk to students about is to try to, when we're taking a look at behavior or ethics or anything, think through that from like a perspective of natural selection or evolution or something like that. And I think that one of the things this book did exceptionally well was to neither sort of do this thing where we anthropomorphize everything or think of things in like human terms, or like how we name a car or something like that. And I thought at the same time she did a really good job of not sort of participating in the opposite of that, or anthropodenial, which is this process where we say, oh no, that's nothing like what we're doing, and we sort of try to reject that these other creatures have anything in common with us. So I really appreciated, sort of as Chris mentioned at the beginning, how many different ways she approached this topic of conversation, and I think it led to a much better, or a much more interesting understanding of how our cooperation, us being Homo sapiens, is so unique.
Okay. Let me throw something out at you that sort of my perspective on sort of human interdependence, and I'll just go back around and start and ask each of you in turn. I think of it as we sort of are operating on three levels. One is as individuals trying to, get the best results for ourselves, or maybe our families. And a layer above that is a group or a tribe where we know the people involved, and sort of a key mechanism in cooperation is repeated interaction and recognition of each other. So, this sort of the Dunbar number of about 150 people is kind of the right size for that group. And the enforcement mechanisms are sort of informal. I interact with you, you defect in a game theory sense, you screw me over in a ordinary language sense, and I'm going to find a way to punish you later on, knowing you personally. So that's at the group level. That's the second layer. And at that layer, the cooperation is based on this kind of informal mechanisms. And then at a larger level, we live in larger societies where we don't know everybody, and we may not have repeated interactions. And there we rely on formal rules. So I say in a business, when the business gets above the Dunbar number in terms of number of people, you start to see the written org chart, the employee manual, the onboarding process, the and decisions are carried out in writing and so on like that. So anyway, I'd like to sort of each person's reaction to that, and sort of it seems to me that both the group behavior and certainly the formal large organization behavior are pretty unique to humans. Okay, so Chris, what are your...
Yes, I think I agree with you for the most part that these kind of rules that we have in place for how to interact with each other on a societal level enables us to interact with strangers in a way that we can feel safe and we know what to expect. And that's certainly lacking in other primate species. So they're going to be very tightly knit with their family and their group, but then anything outside of that is going to be a lot more shaky, because they don't have, I think the word she kept using in this book is institutions. I think that's absolutely right. So as humans, we have institutions that kind of protect us on a societal scale, and that make us cooperate and coordinate our behavior with each other. So I think that the way you broke it down with those three levels is absolutely true, and it is. And the human case is certainly unique. And then I think that somebody mentioned this a little earlier, but I think the main kind of driver for the human uniqueness is probably language, and all of the kind of cognitive underpinnings of language that enable us to communicate really nuanced ideas to each other, and also kind of have this repository of ideas that we share and that gets passed down in a way that other primates don't. They can't have that that kind of level of sophistication that enables that third level you described.
Is there a middle layer in chimpanzee society where they're sort of punishing defectors and saying, you misbehaved?
There absolutely is, and I think Bart can speak to this too, probably in an experimental sense. But at least in chimpanzee society, you do get that kind of, you get the societal structure, and you get kind of group enforcement of standards. So they have a
How would
sense
that
of
work? How would that work, for example? How would
sure.
that show up?
Yep. So if let's say a lot of times you'll see, especially young chimpanzees will be trying to kind of test the social, the strength of the social network. So they'll go up and maybe kind of slap an elderly member and then run away, just kind of like, what are you going to do about this? And then what you'll see, this happens in both wild chimpanzee groups and in zoo settings. What you'll see is not only the individual who this injustice was done to will get up and start screaming and chase, but also the surrounding individuals as well, because everybody agrees they've broken kind of a rule. You can't just go around slapping each other without repercussion. So it's an opportunity for the young one to kind of test the system and learn, and also an opportunity for the group itself to kind of reinforce the standards that they live under.
Okay. Bart, you have any additional thoughts here?
So I think your breakdown is useful, and in the way I think about it as well. I think one thing I would add to it is how you treat other individuals. So those that they're close to you, you could treat them as individuals, so you know what kind of will tick them off or not tick them off, what will help benefit them or not benefit them. And so that's what we do in that for an informal set of arrangements. So you can be much more flexible at how you treat. You could treat, but once you don't know people and you don't know them personally, then we have these kind of rules that treats everyone the same because they're part of the same group. And I think the magic of human beings is that we can make people who are enemies and turn them into the friends, and have them be a different, not known, but still be treat them all the same, as opposed to just be an alien threat. And that's kind of what is really hard in chimpanzees is to get that alien, not part of your group, that you're going to treat as a threat to become a non-threat, but still be a member of another group.
Okay, Jack, what do you think of this sort of this in-group, out-group stuff, or anything else that we've
Yeah,
talked
I mean,
about?
I suppose my comment, just as both of you guys went through that, is while I certainly accept the basic premise that humans have a better ability to have institutional structures, right? I think it's sometimes easy to forget that that's probably true for, like, I don't know, a third of the world, half of the world, something like that. And that while we do probably have a capacity that's different, not everybody is living in the types of scenarios and settings that maybe we think of as idealistic. I mean, I think of how hard it might be to join forces with somebody who's of a different political group at the moment, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of acceptance there. So while I think there is definitely an institution that we are able to participate in that other animals are not, I do my best to remember that maybe the people on this phone call do a better job of that than like a random sampling of the population.
Yeah, another book I reviewed several years ago is called Rule of the Clan. And I think it's a very discouraging book for libertarians, because libertarians have this view that, oh, if you just got this, this awful institution of the state out of the way, people would figure out different ways to cooperate and they wouldn't be so coercive. And instead, this book says that kind of the default method of organization for humans is clans, where the only way people of different groups can cooperate is if the clan leaders meet and agree on something and say, all right, well, this was wrong, you have to be punished. But it's only within a clan do you get the kind of cooperative behavior we're talking about. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Jack, or I mean, you said that you thought only about a third of people can
Yeah,
really
I mean,
enjoy
I
these
could probably do
institutions.
a better job of like stat checking that or something,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, I think how can I answer this? I think that the uh balance of people getting along in society is much more tenuous than we would like to think. I think that when people find themselves in uh, poor economic or scary situations, their ability to listen to, or their not even ability, their willingness to listen to institutional rules dissipates really, really quickly.
yeah. Okay. Let me.
Can I just add one thing to what Christopher was saying, in that the importance of language? I thought that was one thing that didn't come through in the book very well. That it was kind of in passing, like humans may have these different cognitive abilities, but the idea of having symbolic thought that makes all these special things possible in human beings was not really kind of talked about. And so and I think it leads to in a few places where things went kind of backwards. So like she mentioned that without being able to manage reputations, we wouldn't really be able to trade and specialize. I think if you understood how is it that human beings get to trade and specialize, the symbolic thought that makes that possible makes reputation mechanisms possible. So it was, there was a little bit of a separation there, that if there's the one common thing, as Christopher mentioned, that's the symbolic thought that makes language possible, that's going to make all these behaviors possible, then that kind of explains why we're doing what meerkats and termites and ants and naked mole rats and all these things, where they're all doing one thing like us.
Yeah.
And that was kind of what was kind of, I thought, downplayed or not really mentioned in the book.
Yeah, well, that's in a way the sort of a fundamental question in anthropology is sort of what makes humans different. And, some people, there's answers like bigger brains, there's answers like opposable thumbs. I think her theory is that we had a difficult ecological niche, that the other apes could pick low-hanging fruit, so to speak, and we couldn't, and we had to survive in more niches. And of course, over prehistory and so on, we go into many niches whereas other animals stick to one niche. Um, and one thing that other books that I've read emphasize is teaching or culture. That is, um, you know, we'll learn something and remember it not only as individuals or as a small group, but as a society. Um, so that view of this fundamental question is that we, perhaps because of the more difficult ecological niche, had to get better at teaching and learning. And then teaching and learn, that requirement to teach and learn in turn induces this language skill. I don't know if anyone has a thought on that. Maybe.
Those two are certainly related, but it's probably not one before the other. They probably kind of, it was like in tandem, so it's probably like a feedback loop. So the better you get at communicating, the better you get at passing information, and then the actual information itself gets more nuanced and complex, and you create really human culture, which is different from animal culture, because animal culture is very much based, where it exists, it's very much based on kind of trial and error learning or goal emulation. You see another animal doing something and you're not replicating the exact behavior, you're replicating the goal and then you kind of happen upon that behavior, rather than humans where you're actually actively teaching how to do a behavior. So that's kind of, there's kind of these, what you're saying is so true, but those two ideas are so interlinked that they probably wasn't one then the other.
Any comment, Bart or Jack, on that?
Yeah, so what I found interesting about chimpanzees, well, they may not, in her way of definition, teach, they do learn as juveniles. And so they will pull leaders around to show them how this works, for how to use a hammer and anvil stone. And so they found out there in the wild that the juveniles are very inefficient at it. And so there's much more waste than where the kind of leaders of the mentors are. And so they will then bring a mentor over to kind of make sure they get the right size rock for the right kind of nut to make the drop work. And so even if we're not, so the goal part is there, and it's not being taught. I mean, the mentor isn't saying, I'm going to do this for you, but the juvenile knows that the mentor does it better and can help them with it.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bart. So I actually did a bunch of my PhD at that field site in Bosu, where it's the only place where they use stone tools to crack open nuts. And it's true, the young ones are so inefficient, and it's really just really prolonged periods of time just spent in the vicinity of their mother, watching their mother do the correct behavior. And then the mother also tolerates the young stealing the nut after it gets cracked. It's called tolerated scrounging. So the situation of the mother offspring bond and tolerance is what enables the offspring to just be there watching, and then enough watching and trial and error gets them to the place where they're doing it themselves. But it's a long road, and it doesn't involve this kind of pedagogy that we have as humans.
So you referred to using stone tools. I thought I heard you say that this is kind of the only group that does this, or is that just
Yeah, so that's a great point. There's kind of regional cultures, material cultures amongst chimps in Africa. So in West Africa, they use stone tools to crack open nuts, but then in East Africa, they don't. Even though they have stones and nuts, they don't use them. So, and that you get these regional differences that are caused by the local cultures. So each group kind of behaves differently. And in West Africa is the only place where they'll use the stone tools. And then this one field site, Bosu, is the only place where they'll use both an anvil stone and a hammer stone, and then the nut. So it's kind of a three-part tool. Elsewhere in West Africa, they'll use an anvil stone and a nut, but they'll crack it on top of kind of a substrate or a tree root. So that three-part tool is unique to the site that I used to go to.
and how large a collection of chimps are in that site?
Well, it's dwindling, so it's a classic case of chimps, their territory being kind of infringed upon by human settlements. So there's only a handful of chimps left at that particular site. But they're nearby is a large national forest with hundreds of chimps. It's just they're separated by savanna. So it's the story all over West Africa. It's these kind of isolated groups. It's kind of a conservation challenge.
Okay, so yeah, I was just wondering, how large a culture can do this kind of sophisticated teaching, learning, whatever.
Yep. So yeah, that group historically, when it started getting studied in the 70s, it had over 20 to 30 chimpanzees, and nowadays there's just I think between 5 and 8 left. And so they're the only ones that have been observed using this three-part tool. So after that, if that community dwindles out, then we don't know if they're the only ones that have that, or if there's nearby groups that do it as well, but are not habituated, so we haven't seen them doing it. It's kind of a mystery.
Too bad there aren't more. You can imagine all sorts of experiments where you dump a few of them into a different colony and see if the technology spreads, or it just never does.
Well, we do know that the young female chimps emigrate when they get to their reproductive years, when they're teenagers. They leave their natal group and go find a new group. And we know that if the females are coming from a group that doesn't have that cultural stone tool behavior, they don't learn it later in life. So it's kind of if you don't learn how to crack stone tools when you're a young wild chimp, you're not going to learn ever. So that's kind of an interesting wrinkle as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm ready to turn to the audience if we have some questions from the audience. I guess Shelley, do you have some people?
I currently
Mhm.
do not. I gave them until 1:45. So if anybody does have a question, we would love to hear from you. Oh, Amy
Yeah.
Willis.
I have a question. As will not surprise our panelists, I'm interested in the education and pedagogy connection with chimps. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. So, like, for example, why do we think it is that those chimps who don't experience a particular skill as kids, I don't know what we call juveniles, can't learn that later, and sort of how that compares to this organism design for humans? That's for basically everyone and all. So
Yeah. So why can't you teach the young chimp or the more mature chimp how to use stone tools?
Sorry,
Well,
sorry, I thought of like trying to teach my mom how to use an iPad, and
I guess
I'll let you answer more sophisticatedly, Chris.
I think I think it's similar with humans. I mean, there's a different phases of life, right? And for young primates, they're kind of more open to learning about their environment and ways to gather food and that sort of thing. Um, but it also, I think, a lot of it has to do with the mother offspring relationship and the kind of that period is so important for really all the great apes to learn really valuable skills that are going to help them later in life. But then once they have learned those skills, they kind of get more on an autopilot just in terms of how they forage. And what I'm talking about here is mostly just foraging techniques, like how they get their food, their calories. So this is true in orangutans as well, and gorillas. They have to learn at that young age what trees give me food, where in my territory am I going to find that food, and then if it's like the nut or if it's a fruit that's got a shell, how do I get at it? How do I process that food? And all of that information is usually learned pretty young in life.
And are they learning it young because they're willing to do a lot of trial and error and they have the patience to do that? Or is it because their parents are around and they trust their parents, and if their parents weren't around, they wouldn't learn it because they wouldn't have somebody they trust?
Honestly, I think it's really a cognitive question. So it's about cognitive development, similar to the way that humans learn languages really easily when they're young. It's the same kind of mechanism for other types of skills that primates learn. Um, but I think, yeah, that's probably the main mechanism we're talking about.
There's when Language Research Center in Georgia State was teaching chimpanzees how to kind of match little lexicograms to actions. There's a story about how they tried to teach this adult mother the system, and she was failing and not doing very well at it. And then all of a sudden, the young one that she had around with picked it up immediately. And so it was that's very much like language. Something while the brain was really young and plastic, that the mind was able to pick up of this system in a way that the parent couldn't.
Yeah, it'd be great to know what that exact mechanism is, right? So we could learn to teach the old dog new tricks. Yeah, that's
I don't know.
Well, another interesting anecdote about that, I'll be really quick with this one. In the wild, we get infants watching their mothers do the stone tool use, and that's how they learn. And in a zoo setting, we kind of use the same principle to teach it ideally to teach the young chimpanzees how to use, like in my case, a computer touchscreen. If we have the mother using it and the infant is watching, they're much more likely to learn quickly and get better on their own, because that's such a natural situation for them to just watch the mom and do what the mom is doing. So we're taking that kind of natural scenario of a offspring watching its mother and learning from that and applying it to a totally new kind of artificial context. But we're kind of maintaining that same kind of dynamic.
what's the action that they're performing with the touch screen? What are they doing?
Sure. And Bart, you can speak to this well, because I know you and Sarah have done some touchscreen experiments. So we give the chimpanzees at our zoo touchscreens to use every day, and they play kind of these game-like tasks. So they'll touch stimuli in the screen, they'll solve little problems, and then after they do that, they get fed some food. So we make it totally voluntary for them. They don't have to do it, but we give them this opportunity as a form of enrichment, and they can earn their own food, kind of like a naturalistic situation. And they can also kind of exercise their minds while doing so. So that's kind of the idea behind it. But to answer your question, it's kind of these little games that they play that actually we collect the data and we're able to kind of ask questions like, how do you think about this problem? How do you solve it?
I think I've read elsewhere that if you used like their speed of response in these kinds of contexts as a measure of IQ, that their IQ would be very high. That they're really quick.
Oh, yeah, I watched some rhesus macaques and some capuchin monkeys at Georgia State. They use a joystick, and they're like just moving around really quickly, making decisions and out popping pellets. And it's like they're like little kids in front of their video games. They're doing the same kind of thing very intently, and out pops these pellets for their rewards when for the tasks.
Okay.
So if I can ask a follow-up question, and I know, and Chris, you might have the link to this. One of your, I think it was Rob Shoemaker who had that op-ed about concerns about screen time for primates, just like we are concerned about screen time for teenagers, right, or small kids. But so I'll try to find a link to that when I'm not asking a question. But I guess my sort of larger question that I wanted to get at was the relationship between cooperation and cognition, and what makes this sort of educational piece different, right? So Arnold titled his review of Raihani "The Cooperative Ape," right? And we've gone through how this cooperation among primates can lead to specialization, trade, all of these things that perhaps we thought once upon a time were sort of uniquely human, right? So I guess my real question is teaching and learning these sort of complex tasks different in some way than the sort of cooperation that leads us to cooperative activities, right? Like, so in other words, is learning or is education a fundamentally human pursuit?
So I think she touches on the Tomasello kind of argument about teaching for, and so understanding that when the mentor is demonstrating for you, it's not the outcome that's important, but the abstract process that you're doing. And that seems to be very different, I think, between humans and non-humans. And I think what makes that work is that a human has a sense of the other being as having an abstract and a mind being directed towards their welfare, for doing something for them. I think this is the language that he uses, and that means you have to have an idea of their mind and your mind being connected in some way that I think is not going to be possible if you don't have a symbolic system of thought.
Okay. Do you want, Shelley, we have a question.
We do. We're gonna, excuse me, aloud. Elad, if you can unmute, you are ready to go.
I have I had a question, but after Amy's question, I have another question. So it's going to be a follow-up. As part of the experiment with chimpanzees, did you try to introduce new technologies? I'm not talking about iPads and stuff like that, to teach chimpanzees new skills that you didn't observe kind of in the natural habitat.
Sure. I can take that, Bart. You can probably do that too. That question. Sure. So there's a lot of skills that we teach zoo-housed chimpanzees that wild chimpanzees wouldn't encounter. A lot of them have to do with how we manage the chimps, like their husbandry. So like giving them food and medicine and those sorts of things. We have to teach them special behaviors. And then in terms of actual like using technologies and objects that they wouldn't encounter in the wild. We do that a lot, and I think the touchscreen is probably the best example. But there are others like the joystick and that sort of thing. So yeah, we do teach them, but it's not the same process, right, as humans where we're explaining things to them. We teach them in the way that they learn, which is we can demonstrate something and they'll learn through that kind of observation and then trial and error on their own, and that's probably the main mechanism.
And I bet you haven't tried to teach them to cooperate, right? To carry a log together.
That's actually something that we study. We do study cooperation. I think I can give you the very quick explanation of the main paradigm that's been used. It's a sliding table, and there's two ropes coming off of it, kind of threaded through the table, and you have to pull on each end of the rope towards you to get the table to move towards you. If you just pull on one end, then the other end will come unthreaded and the table doesn't move. And so what you do is you put this table in front of two chimpanzees that are in two different rooms or spread apart in space, and they both have to figure out, oh, we have to pull together at the same time to get that table to move. And you ask, okay, do they figure that out right away? Is it a spontaneous understanding? Do they have to kind of do the trial and error and learning? Are they more likely to want to cooperate with a familiar chimp that they like versus one that they don't? So you can ask all those different questions using this sort of experimental paradigm, and it's been done with chimps and bonobos, and they do the task successfully. It's also been done with other animals like elephants and crows.
Is
So
that
yeah, we have these
is
tools.
that sort of like Bart's experiment? I mean, that's sort of a cooperation thing, right? When you're talking about the red and the blue token.
Yes. Yeah, yes. It's the matter of that both at the same time have to be returned. You have to, and so you teach them to a process of, okay, they're collected and you show them, and then they see that they're both red, and then they both see the rewards coming out. So they're taught how to return a particular token, and then the reward is associated with it.
Okay, and I've forgotten how you did the setup. It wasn't a prisoner's dilemma setup, right?
It's more of an assurance game. So it's if you choose the hare, you just get a sure outcome of a sure payoff. And if you both chose the cooperative stag, then you both get the higher payoff. And then and if you choose stag and the other one chooses hare, then you get nothing as going for stag.
So sorry, is there a dominant strategy then in that game? You know, that
No, it's weakly dominant. So as if you're both choosing it, but so there's two Nash equilibria, one where you both choose stag and one where you both choose hare.
okay. Okay, and then as I recall, you said they go by kind of trial and error and they land on the better.
Yes. Yes.
So they're not necessarily calculating it, you know, if the other one chooses this and I choose this, then this will happen versus.
Well, right. So that's what needs to be teased out. And so rhesus macaques seem to be just like paying off the patterns. Like, so they'll start off randomly choosing blue or red, and then like, wow, but the red one, whenever the other one seems to be paying off a little bit more, so I'll play a little red a little bit more, and then the other one plays a little red more, and it's just kind of matching the probabilities of getting red. Whereas they think that the chimpanzees are doing more than that they're not just playing off the probability matching, they're playing off the fact that they know that the other one can choose red and I can choose red, and therefore red will give us a higher joint payoff. Whereas a rhesus macaque is just kind of responding to, well, the world's better with red.
Okay.
And the evidence is that they run them through a series and they'll start at 50-50 and then they'll work their way up to like 65. And then the next time they start playing, they start at 55, then they work their way up to 75. And so they kind of just learn over time, and it grows that they're playing the stag outcome more often.
Did Elad have another question that he wanted to? Or
Yeah, maybe to follow up on Bart's kind of experiments. Did you try to add more colors, so red, the blue, green, and stuff like that, to see if they get better understanding?
So technically they're not, so colors are not as vivid as they are for us. So I actually, when I do red and blue, I'm basically doing the human version of the experiment, which was exactly replicating as closely as possible what the chimpanzees were doing. With chimpanzees, they have patterns to go with the colors as well. So it's a different kind of pattern catching on the token to make it look different. It's just a different token. And yes, that's real important that if they kind of come to associate this task with this kind of set of tokens, that if you want to do a new task, you better have a new set of tokens that you're working with.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Shelley, we have another person with a question.
We do. Scott, if you would like to unmute, please.
Oh, you're muted again. Okay, Scott, you're muted.
Does not look like he's able to unmute.
You want to throw the question into chat or something?
I will do that right now. One moment, please. The question is live.
Dogma is
Yeah, Scott's having trouble unmuting. He says that in the Q&A. Shelley, are you able to, as host, to unmute him?
Let's see if I can. I'm only allowed to ask. I cannot unmute him for privacy reasons.
Harry seems unmuted.
Oh,
yeah, there
Yep.
you go. Okay. Okay,
Scott, can you?
now go ahead, Scott. You should be able to hear you.
It might be a microphone issue on his end.
Yeah.
Shelley, there's a question in our chat that might be his question. I'm not sure. But
I just sent it out to everybody, so it's
Oh, okay. So I'll read this is Scott's question.
yes.
Okay. So I'll read it out so all the participants can hear it. Scott says, dogma is one way to prevent learning. However, dogma is with us today because our ancestors that utilized it succeeded and survived. So dogma has upsides. Can you talk about the role of dogma in human learning, the upsides and the downsides?
Can I throw this one at Jack first?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, man, it's so tough for me to start on that because of so many various interests, trying to focus that question with respect to primates. I mean, I think honestly, probably Chris and Bart are better able to speak to this just because of their work with chimpanzees. But I mean, I think in terms of what I think about most, I think dogma has more downsides than upsides. It's very limiting, and is a hard way to try to, is a tough starting point for learning new and unique concepts. But like I said, these guys have spent way more time with chimps, so they're probably better suited to answer that question
let's
than
look
I
at
am.
humans though. So for humans is I'm guessing what he's saying is how did it survive if it only has downsides, right? If there must be some upside in human society that
Oh,
makes it survive.
yes, thanks for clarifying. I mean, I think that a large group of people that support the same dogmas can feel a certain amount of closeness together, right? So there's a lot of community surrounding dogma. I think there's a lot of bonding that goes around with supporting various dogmas. So my guess is dogma has survived as much because it makes people feel included as much as it does anything else. I don't know that in terms of learning, dogma has been like a primary driver.
Right. Yeah, no, I think of it as kind of a tribal thing that and in a way it may function better as a tribal signal if it's false, right? Because and if our tribe's slogan is the sun rises in the east, and I meet somebody from another tribe and ask, where does the sun rise? And they say from the east, I make the mistake of thinking that they're in my tribe. Whereas if it's something that's unique or even false, then it really serves as a nice tribal identifier, and I know who they are and who we are and stuff like that. Shelley, do you have any more in the queue, or is that?
That was our last question.
Okay. I'll give people a chance to give any final comments, otherwise we can wrap it up.
I'd have one question for Chris and Bart real quick, and we can go through this later or something if that's appropriate. But I'm super curious about the principle that you guys mentioned, the Tomasello principle, right? Where we're distinguishing between sort of goal-oriented learning versus maybe a mother purposefully teaching or something like that. And my question is, like, how do you distinguish when one is happening versus the other? And maybe my suspicion is there's not a simple answer to that question, but I'm curious as to what that looks like.
Chris, why don't you take the first shot?
Sure. And I think there's a lot of kind of theory literature about this question. I think there's a good Robert Boyd is quite good on this topic. So the idea is that you differentiate between true imitation and goal emulation. And the idea behind true imitation is that when you're teaching and learning, you are modeling the behavior of the teacher as closely as you can. So like the movements that they're going through with their body, and even if it's ignoring the goal itself, you just want to be doing the same thing that they're doing. And then if you're teaching, you want to be teaching those movements and that sort of thing. So I think there are experiments that you can do where you can look at like the actual mechanics of the posture and that sort of thing if they're learning a behavior, to see whether it looks like they're doing the goal emulation versus the actual true imitation. And that's something that really hasn't been seen in non-humans, is that kind of motor imitation, true imitation.
The experiments are designed to show that the chimpanzees only care about the outcome, what happened, not how you got there.
Yeah.
And so if you can see that they are only looking at whether or not this worked or not, then they'll get reinforced, like, oh, it worked, that I got to do this. This didn't work.
That sounds smarter than humans somehow. I mean, it seems like, isn't there the phrase like over imitation? Like the humans will, imitate some unnecessary steps in a process. And you're saying that chimps are smarter than that?
Well, but if you don't know what you need to know, it is smarter to do everything.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm certainly going to look into it more. I find that to be an intriguing concept on how to I mean, so much of it feels like philosophy of mind or something for me, where you're trying to like really decide the mental states of these creatures without being able to talk to them. And I'm in no way lobbying an opinion about which is right or wrong. It's just super intriguing.
And it is a fascinating topic. I agree with you, Jack. And I think that there's a lot of connected ideas that are studied, like the idea of theory of mind. So how much do the apes know that other apes have mental lives that are separate from their own? And the research on that is so interesting because it does seem like they have some idea.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a limited theory of mind, but it's not like a full theory of mind that enables us to kind of build a model in our own minds of what others know and don't know, and then behave towards them according to that model that we're using in our own mind. That sort of process might be too elaborate for apes, but they have some rudiments of it.
Yeah, I mean, like when I think about like a DeWall phrase, like building blocks of something, and like that feels very like this is why I'm so intrigued by it, because I'm curious if it's a thing where we're doing this human thing where we like try to say ours is better, but maybe we're not quite sure if that's the case yet or not. Again, I'm not saying I like have a clear understanding of it, but it's certainly an intriguing concept.
All right, well, I think we're just about at an hour, so I think it's a good place to wrap up. That was a great discussion, and as I anticipated, I learned quite a bit.
Well, thank
Likewise.
you. Thank you, friends, for joining us, and thank you to all of our guests in the Zoom room. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk with us. We'll have a recording available by the first of the week for anyone who missed it, and in case you want to revisit, and we'll have the links out to you shortly. So Arnold, Chris, Bart, Jack, thanks so much.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
guys.
you.
Nice to meet all of you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.